Hello, everybody. First of all, thanks a lot for the invitation to the 5th International Award for the Public Art. I am Angelica Teuta, a nomadic visual artist from Medellin, Colombia. I developed my art practice as an artist, professor, researcher, and active participant of my environment. Art is what makes societies evolve, reflect, reveal, and ultimate improve. It is important to immerse people in fictional ambiences that talk about the context we are surrounded by in order to have boundless comprehension of our construction of needs. This presentation that I bring to you today is called Emotional Architecture, South American Cosmovisions. This is a mental map that I will develop through a presentation. Emotional architecture could be a methodology, but it's also an ongoing project since 2013 that aims to be a guide for working in public spaces and socially engaged practices. It's started in Latin America, but the idea is that it could be practiced in other spaces or countries or places. I'm gonna ask a few questions that started to shape this methodology. What's the role of emotion in an architecture of mind? How do we lovely hack the systems we live on? How do we question the concept of naturalness and power relations? How do we create new languages? How do we learn from the senses? How do we create other relationships with the space? How do we transform the everyday into extraordinary? How do we converge between utopia and fantasy to promote the solution of needs? The social, political, and climatic agenda of the states urge both urban spaces and communities to question the extractivist strategies that currently govern the world. South America, between artistic frameworks and new ways of thinking in public spaces, increasingly questions its colonial heritage and turns its gaze to its cosmovision and ancestry knowledge to offer more suitable and respectful alternatives to its environment. Emotional architecture seeks to investigate a contemporary and hybrid way that crosses the art thinking, transdisciplinary practices, experimentation, and collaboration that explore formats that challenge new structures of production and way of living in a community. There are two thinkers that I want to bring up. Matthias Goritz, born in Germany in 1915 and died in Mexico City in 1990, he was a painter and a sculptor, but also a creator of the Emotional Architecture Manifesto. He immigrated to Spain and North Africa and then in 1949 moved with his wife to Mexico. In 1953, he first presented Emotional Architecture Manifesto with the pre-inauguration of the Eco Experimental Museum that is still running nowadays. Co-created with Luis Barragan and Ruth Rivera architects, he believed that emotion affects spaces and spaces affect emotions, and art has a spiritual elevation that could come back to the spaces. On the other hand, Silvia Rivera Cusicanqui, born in 1949, is an Aymara activist, sociologist, and oral historian who has worked with indigenous movements in Bolivia over the last 4 decades. She believes that there is a necessity of political silence. There is an excess of discursive politics, so we need to try to go back to face conversations. I wish I could be in Shanghai at the moment talking about this face-to-face conversation. So we can look into each other's eyes and see them sparkle so we can feel vibes or either feel the frustration. And all this helps to be itself, being humble and gentle instead of arrogant. South America still needs time and others' way of thinking and acting to recover democracy. We still need to recognize others, especially women. In order to understand democracy, we need to understand what it is to be indigenous or native. There is hope for the recognition of the pluricultural continent, interethnic and plural project. Still hope of ending with structural violence like racism or gender violence. And we have to recover democracy on a day-to-day basis. Three birds are important here that Silvia Kusikanki also talks in different conversation and conference. One is to have curiosity, second is to figure it out, and third is to communicate. The new ways of thinking in public space are the ones related to nature.
Shelters occupy wilderness, reveals landscape, inhabits woodland, engulfs dwelling.
Sometimes I think my job is to open a door to some dream-like space. I don't really see any difference between ages, or a child and an adult, but I do see the difference and problems of adulthood. We profess that we already know everything.
A forest houses a tent, and a tent shelters a forest.
We all experience the world differently. We create reality as we go through space and time. I can't avoid getting caught up in the loop of this image.
A forest holds a tent holds a forest. A tent and a forest are home.
What captures me the most is the idea of hiding in open space, the forest. So coming back to the mental map, something relevant that I would like to emphasize is the contemporary correlation between public space and nature, sometimes read by the arts, architecture, or design. We need to start switching from anthropocentric to biocentric thinking, learn from animal habitats, and realize that we have a green or plant blindness, which means the inability to observe or notice the plants in one's own environment, but also results in an underappreciation of them, in a limited interest in a plant conservation. In Colombia, a yerbatera, that is very close to herbalist, is a person without being a doctor is dedicated to healing, especially with medicinal herbs. This person has a greater competence and cultural mastery over the knowledge of plants. She or he knows them from its biological and mystical place. Connecting the theme of the forum, place remaking, with South America cosmovision and emotional architecture, community-based art projects, socially engaged practice, and working collaboration are major points on the process. Community art is an artistic activity that is based in a community setting, characterized by interaction or dialogue with the people. Here happens a cultural democracy, where we find no boundaries between high and low culture in order to make art accessible to a wider audience. It is based on a cultural exchange, where ancestral and popular knowledge take on a greater prominence. Socially engaged practice describes art that is collaborative, often participatory, and involves people as the medium or the material of the work. Social engaged practice can be associated with activism because it often deals with political issues. Artists who work within this field will often spend much time integrating into a specific community which they wish to help, share, or improve. Most common groups to work with is children, low-income neighborhood, rural spaces, and indigenous reservation. In this case, the collaborative process is transdisciplinary and multidisciplinary, pluricultural, and interethnic. Matthias Goris, in his manifesto, wrote, and I quote here, "Art in general, and naturally also architecture, is a reflection of the spiritual state of human in their time. But there is the impression that the modern architecture, individualized and intellectual, is sometimes exaggerating, perhaps because it has lost close contact with the community." I close quotes. He pointed out too much functionalism, utility, and logic instead of emotion and spiritual elevation. So, emotional architecture immerses the visitor in a fictional ambience that talks about the context or need that she, he, they, or surroundings experience. That could be ephemeral, permanent, or semi-permanent, and there is always a symbiotic play between the host and the guest, We could name it space, emotions, structure, object, or action. Having a recorded conversation for the project in 2018, the Colombian architect Sebastián Monsalven explained this. The origin of architecture are closely linked to the need of building shelters for inclement weather. Today, much more complex relationships exist and take priority over the basic necessity. However, if you find yourself anywhere in South America or in the so-called Third World, you will see that the most fundamental human needs are not always met. People need to survive, suffering from the lack of food and education, and nowadays climate change. The discussion is really often about how important the role of the architect is in terms of influencing the shape of the city. At the end of the day, architecture in those cases defines 30 or 40% of the city, and the rest can be constructed informally. However, humans are not only guided by purely physical and basic personal needs within the space, but they also seek to fulfill the needs which stem from the psyche and their emotions. It is not to be a strictly social project, but is focused on the emotional function of the shelters. The relation between architecture and art, architecture and engineering, architecture and medicine can trigger the development of the processes and products. Contemporary ideas appear when different efforts are combined, when hybrids between various professions and various knowledge are creating together. We seek the work as a collaborative effort, generate more knowledge and raise questions, which can lead to other questions about the future, addressed either jointly or separately. So architecture is not only for experts, but sometimes that work have a bit of a professional connotation that can be intimidated to outsiders or people who are not in the field. Emotional architecture is everything, and the goal is to make the work as accessible as possible. On the last part of the mental map, it should be noted that every project and methodology need to be clear out tools and mediums, but also principles. In order to develop this, one must have awareness of budget, time limit, project duration, agents, and actors in the process. In terms of materials, emotional architecture uses recycled materials in a good percentage, do-it-yourself manuals and ideas, vernacular knowledge, basic construction methods, and fiction. As a formalization or giving final shape to the aesthetics, archetypal structure and mixing outdoor and indoor elements are being selected. Art thinking is the method and device to apply the concepts I've been talking here. I started with the how question, taking risks, developing a different mindset, and try a broader range of challenges. And finally, to close this conversation and raise some questions after, let's acknowledge that there is sort of desire between what one has and what one desires. The notion of buen vivir, good living, is part of a broader aphorism in Latin America that places concrete requirements which make it difficult to reduce it to a simple concept or governmental formula. Silvia Cusicanqui and our first Afro-Latin American Vice President, Francia Marquez, adopted in their speeches. I will apply it as my indigenous friend Embera Chami Marley Tascon showed it to me. Buen vivir, good living, is to have good heart, listening, observation, and sweet word. Thanks so much for this opportunity and to share these ideas here. Bye.